Hello, I'm Richard Mathias, and this is the State of the Market for UK property lawyers. Every month, we have a deep dive into the data to find out what's happening in the UK property market. And today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Kai Logan from Bradley's Estate Agents down in the southwest. We will be looking at the data for estate agency, how many houses they're listing, how many houses are selling, and that is a fantastic predictor for conveyancers, because what comes on the market today will be selling in a couple of months' time and then completing for you about 3 months later. So what we're really doing is crystal ball gazing. What happens today, we can pretty well accurately predict is going to be happening for you in terms of completions 6 months down the line. So with no further ado, let me introduce you to Kai Logan. Hello, Kai.
Morning, Richard.
Very nice to have you with us today. How is it down in the southwest?
Nice, warm and sunny for a change today. Yeah. So generally everyone's smiling.
Yeah, that's good, isn't it? Smiling apart from last night's football result that was a little bit boring, wasn't it?
Just a touch. Just a touch. Don't worry, I've just woken up.
Yeah, I think we all have. Anyway, very nice to have Kai with us today. Kai is the marketing director, and you're probably one of the largest estate agents in the country, aren't you, Kai?
Yeah, we've got 30 branches across 3 counties, and we're an independent. We're still wholly owned by individuals, which is very proud of.
Nice to hear as well. And how many properties do you list on an average month, and how many do you sell? Give the viewers an idea of how big you are.
An average would be somewhere around 300 newly marketed properties per month, and we'll sell anywhere between 250 up to 300, depending on the market conditions and obviously the pricing. What the trend of prices and how confident the market is.
Okay, so let's get straight into this. That's great. And our first graph of the day shows how many listings. Oh, and I must give a quick shout out here. All the data that we're going to be showing you today is provided by 20EA and 20 Convey, and specifically we used some of the graphs produced by Chris Watkin. Now Chris does his own stat show on YouTube once a week on a Friday, mainly aimed at estate agents, and he has very kindly allowed us to use some of these graphs. So thanks to Chris, thanks to 20EA, that's the credits done. So let's dive into what they've shown us. So this first graph, Kai, is the number of cumulative listings listed in 2024. So we can see at the bottom, so far, 852,000 so far this year, which is, it's 10% up on last year and significantly higher than just about any other year for the last 7. What do you make of that, Kai?
That's certainly no surprise to me whatsoever. That's exactly what we're seeing here in the southwest. Instructions have become more freely available. I think last year there was a lot of pent up sort of tentative sellers, the wannabe sellers, but the market conditions, economic conditions were holding them back. This year they've just allowed themselves to go on, list their property. And what listings do in the property market is circulate more listings, because somebody sees something they like that stimulates some activity. Therefore, they then put their property up for sale, and that reciprocates around the marketplace. So more properties lead to even more properties being listed. We're about 14% up, so just a touch above that on a company level, and therefore that data is of no surprise to me at all. I think I'm right in saying that there are now more available properties for sale than there has been for at least 5 years, and some reports are suggesting 10 years since 2000, or 9 years since 2015.
Yeah, we've got a graph to show that in a little while. I know you've been in this industry a few years, so more than the 7 on, but I'm not saying how many here or embarrass you in that show. But in your experience, would you say that there's more properties on the market than whatever a normal year is? Or can you remember times when there was a lot more than this? And where do you think it's still fairly constricted supply, shall we say?
I would say we are now returning to a normal level of available stock, a typical pre-COVID, 2019, 18, 17. And the listings that we're seeing, if you look in your graph, 2018 and 19, okay, we are above those levels, but historically we would have had a lot more property for sale to start with. So the overall available stock would have been
We'll come back to that. I've got a great graph for that later. So let's move on then. National weekly listings. This is a graph of showing how that has ebbed and flowed through each week so far this year. You can see pretty clearly from the white line here, it is 2024, that we are, well, if you compare it to last year, which is the pink line, we were well above it for the majority of the year. But in recent weeks, it seems to have just tapered off a little bit, and now the white line is more or less on the pink line, maybe a little bit above, but overall more listings. And then if you're looking at 2017, 2018, 2019, we're very well positioned compared to them. Is that what you're thinking, Kai?
Yeah, absolutely right. That echoes what we've seen and how I'm hearing it. I have a lot of different contacts the rest of the country as well, some smaller agencies and some larger ones, and it feels very similar, and those trends appear to be fairly widespread.
Okay, so that's listings, and that's important because, as I said earlier, what comes on the market today will sell in 2 months' time? What's your average time to sell?
The national average right now is over 70 days, 74 days. And that was data I got at a conference yesterday from 28th, funnily enough. And that has more than doubled since the lowest, the quickest time to sell in 2021, 22, post-COVID, when the property market was booming. That was about 31 days. So you can see over the last few years, it really has grown and taken longer to sell.
So it's taking 71 days. And after 71 days, we then know that the average time to complete is somewhere around 113 days. So we're talking just over 3 months, aren't we, in that? So yeah, it's a 6-month cycle, isn't it? So this is your predictor for 6 months' time. Moving on, again, just backing up what those figures that we talked about earlier, number of properties for sale in the UK at the moment at a high over the last 7 years of 694,000. And you can see how it absolutely plummeted just after COVID, and it's been on the rise ever since.
Absolutely, that's completely what we've seen, and it's really positive, because for as long as my recent memory, we have had the objection from potential sellers: I don't want to put my property up for sale until I found something that I'm interested in, or at least that I could be interested in. And that's been a real tough battle for our valuers and our branches, trying to say to people, well, the difficulty is you've got to then find a buyer and hope that property's still for sale. And in a reasonable property market, that just isn't going to happen unless you've got something very, very well priced or very, very exclusive and lucrative. So it's always a battle for sellers thinking, what do I do first? Do I put my house up for sale, or do I find the perfect property? The more property there is to choose from in the first place, the more encouraged sellers are, which creates more and more activity in the property market.
And that's great news for both you, of course, and great news for our conveyancers who are watching today. So the signs are positive. Okay, I always bring this slide up every week, and it's about supply and demand, because the supply and demand affects all markets, but especially in the conveyancing and estate agency market. And what we're looking at here is that total houses for sale currently 694,000. At that peak, if I should go back at the drop right at the bottom there, after the COVID period, you can see that there were only 360,000 for sale, which is a really long way down, isn't it, back in November 2021. But, and this is a great stat from Chris Watkin, back in 2008, 1.4 million houses for sale. So we're a mile off that, aren't we? And that's when houses prices start to drop, because what people are actually a little bit concerned about is what's the prices going to be. I mean, it doesn't affect you and I particularly, but people's well-being and how they're viewing the world is my house price rising or is it falling? And at these levels, you would say there's still a long, long way to go before we get to oversupply and not enough demand. Your view?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would echo that. I think that the landscape has changed hugely since 2008. If you look historically, after any recession, there's a house building boom and a house market boom. We didn't have that. And then since then, we've been hit with a number of key events that have caused our economy to stagnate ultimately Brexit, followed by COVID, followed by Ukraine war. And I feel that we're now returning to some level of normality, particularly post-election. And I think there'll be more stability to move forwards. And you might start to see that number. I don't think we'll return to anywhere near 2008 levels, but I do think we'll start to build, and there will just be more activity across the whole marketplace.
Well, that's great. Okay, next graph. So listings is one thing, gross sales agreed is another. So just so the viewers understand what gross sales agreed means in estate agency terms, this is the number of sales where you agree on a weekly basis, no matter what's coming off the other end, not about pipelines, and it's sole subject to contract. It's not the completed jobs. So this is the number of memorandums of sale that are falling on lawyers' desks on a week-to-week basis. And I think this is a really good predictor of what the rest of the market's going to be for the rest of the year, because you can see the white line again here. You can see that it's tracked up and down throughout 2024. All these little dips are the bank holidays, because we're doing it on a weekly basis. So a bank holiday week's only got 4 days. So you can see quite clearly where the bank holidays fall. And again, you can see the white line is above the pink line, but we're probably at about the peak. Forget that little yellow peak in 2017. That's almost an anomaly in the data. We're not sure why that's there, to be honest. We've looked at that. But we are above 2023 and above 2017, 18 and 19, which is really encouraging. But then you can see it, once we get to this point in the year, June, July, it's a slow taper off and then a drop towards the end. Views, Kai?
Yes, I think that the upward trajectory, generally speaking, is exactly what we've seen. What I would expect in most years, as you also see the bank holiday dips. My view is that we're going to see a bigger dip on that graph. If you were to fast forward it and do this in a month's time, or when you do this in a month's time, I think you'll see a bigger dip, and that will really pretty much be the election announcement. And
Right.
I think that just causes everybody to stop what they're doing, take stock, think about it. What does this mean? What does this mean for me? What does it mean for my business? What does it mean for my employer? And that will cause a significant dip, I believe, but it will only be short term, because we're already now, this week in particular, this week is probably the first week where we've returned back to pre-election announcement activity. So
Okay.
we've probably had, what have we had, 4 weeks of stagnant, slowing sales agreed, it's slightly slower listings, but certainly the sales agreed. People are not looking to commit whilst this election period's on. And then this week, suddenly, for some reason, whether it be the foregone conclusion of the result of the election, who knows, but I do believe that activity will start returning back to normal. My view is that it will not taper off like the typical years that we can see on the screen in front of us. I think we'll actually see an increase in activity over the next 3 or 4 months, potentially.
Right, that's really interesting. So this is why we bring people like Kai onto this show, because Kai is really at the sharp end, where as solicitors, you're a little bit 2 to 3 months down the line, not perhaps getting the up-to-date information. And here we have it. There's been quite a lot of speculation. Would the election and would the Euro football mean there was a drop-off in the market? So what you're saying to me, Kai, is that 2 or 3 weeks ago, you noticed a marked decrease. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And interestingly, with another hat that I wear, with my search hat on, I can see that search numbers coming into the search businesses, they've dropped off only in the last week, which would absolutely correlate with what you're saying, because something that all the sales that weren't happening 2 weeks ago mean that search instructions aren't coming through this week. But what you're saying to me now is that any pausing for breath that's caused by the election and the Euros has now seemed to be coming, people are putting it behind them and going, let's just get on with work and move house. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying, which I think summarised really well. I believe historically that you would not really see that increase in activity until the result of the election's been determined. But I believe that there is a combination of reasons, whether it's the likely result of the election being perhaps determined prior. You've also got, I think, that people are just a bit bored of it. I think that there's less engagement with a lot of the political parties, the candidates, and I think that as a result, people are actually already turning away from the election now, which is a little odd. But I think that that's what we're seeing right here and right now. Could be combined with better weather. It could all be combined also from our data, because we're in the southwest. It's a very popular time of year, preschool holidays. We're very busy preschool holidays. So it could be that affecting some of our data. But I was at a conference yesterday with a lot of different estate agents and representatives from the property industry from Wales, across the south of England. They were also saying the same.
Okay, so it very much feels that, you know, the outcome of the election is predicted. There's not much to choose between the main parties in terms of policy. There really isn't, is there? And people just, it's not exactly inspiring, is it? Let's crack on with this data then. Let's have a look at a few more slides. Gross sales, I think this is just showing what we said earlier. This is the number of sales we've had so far this year, 588,000. Again, 10% up so far on last year, and I think your data would back that up. But it's also significantly up on all the years apart from those two big COVID years, which we don't. I mean, it'd be nice to return to them in a regular manner, but not in the way it happened last time around, where everyone suddenly becomes swamped and timescales go out.
Absolutely right. I think whether you're a lawyer or a estate agent, whilst there were some very positive elements of it, the mental health and the physical requirements of the 21-22 era has taken its toll. So, and I think there's lots of things that we as an industry have improved since, as a result of that. More efficiencies, more embracing of technology, various different things, which has been a good thing. But we're nowhere near those levels. And I think that whilst we are going in a positive direction, it will be a long time before we see that sort of number of transactions at this stage of the year.
Okay, let's move on. Sale fall through rate, again. This is important to you as an estate agent. I think lawyers perhaps don't appreciate what this means or how it affects them, and certainly don't measure it. And I think lawyers really should start to try and measure this in their own businesses, because it's important. There are a lot of firms that work on no sale, no fee. So if you've got sales that are falling through, it's important to know how much you are charging, and what the amount of, how many cases are not going to happen. And what we can see here is that, well, certainly after the COVID period, it's dropped down to as low as 19%, but it seems to be rising, albeit slowly. We are seeing a steady rise back towards 22, 23%. And if I just flick to the next slide, you can see some annual fall through rates there. 2024 was 23.4, but the 7-year average was 24%. What does that tie in with what you're doing in the southwest, Kai?
Very much so. This year has been markedly lower than last year, and I think that's a sign of the confidence in the market. And I think that where you've got, generally speaking, up until sort of the end of May, we were running anywhere between 19 and 21%, so hovering 20-ish% year to date for our fall through rate as a business. So 1 in 5 transactions will fall apart for a number of different reasons, whether it be surveys, whether it be change in buyers' positions, sellers' positions, etc.
So I've got 2 questions there. Of those that fall apart, do a good proportion of them stay on the market and find another buyer, or do they just leave the market altogether? Or do they leave the market and, dare I say, go to another agent?
Well, a combination of those things, in truth. The majority will remain on the market. They were selling for a reason. That reason will probably remain the same. There is probably about 10 or 15% that will stop selling altogether. And they are the ones that wanted a particular property, or their personal circumstances have changed financially or health reasons or whatever the reason may be. And they will always have that percentage that will never go on to move in the short term again. But the vast majority will, whether it be with us or another estate agent, will go on to continue to seek a buyer.
And so why that's important is, if a solicitor gets the instruction when the house goes on the market, which is another little hobby horse of mine, while it might fall through first time, there's a good chance they'll get it second time or third time around when you find another buyer, or whether it goes another agent.
Absolutely, and we monitor retention rate, so how many fall through, and then how many we get them retain, and it's very much down to how quickly we find the next buyer as to whether we retain that business or whether we are likely to lose it, and
Yeah,
also depending on whether the price needed adjusting from when it was agreed last time to when it's agreed this time.
yeah,
And the one thing that lawyers will certainly benefit from that estate agents don't is that if they are instructed at the outset when the seller puts house up for sale in anticipation of a buyer, they've bought into that law firm. If a buyer is found, they're obviously ready to go. But the one thing, if they change estate agents, if it falls through, they won't change lawyer. Very, very few occasions will they change lawyer.
and that's positive
They've done
news
all
for
the
them.
form filling.
Well, yeah. Let's not get into forms. No, not today. No. But what I will on my chat last week with Mike Day, we got into quite a big debate about no sale, no fee. Now, whether lawyers realise or not, most estate agents, and I'm assuming you as well, you operate on a no sale, no fee basis, don't you?
Correct, yeah.
And when you're instructing lawyers, you would expect them to operate on a no sale fee, no basis. And
Absolutely.
there's a big selling point both for you and for the consumer, so that works for you, doesn't it? And just explain to the viewers why you feel that's the right way and why it would be helpful if all lawyers are worked in that way.
Well, I think it comes back down to one of our beliefs for, well, 20 plus years has been to onboard a conveyancer at the outset for all sellers. And I know that it's topical and I know there's lots of things going on in the background, but putting that to one side, we're talking about early 2000s where we look to onboard a conveyancer when somebody puts a house up for sale to prepare and become attractive to a buyer, knowing that you're contract ready or not quite, but you're prepared to send out a draft contract to a buyer solicitor pretty quickly. And I think it speeds up the process, but I think if a seller is far more likely to engage a conveyancer if they're not having to pay them as they go. If they know it's a no sale, no fee process, they're aware they're going to possibly pay disbursements, your OC1, OC2. They're going to have a number of small costs in order to get to that position. But in the main, if a seller is enticed with a no sale, no fee offering, then they are far more likely to engage a conveyancer, and therefore the whole thing becomes more attractive, both selling but also a buyer's perspective.
Okay, and just filling it out a bit further, your average fee is, I'm take a wild guess, you're about 1.5% or thereabouts of the price.
Yeah, just shy of 1.5. Yeah.
Okay, and you build your financial model on getting whatever it is, 200 to 300 sales through at 1.5%. So you've built into the fact that some of your jobs, 20%, 25%, are going to fall through, haven't you? And there's no reason why lawyers can't do the same. So they've just got to pitch the original price at the right level, and so that those that complete are subsidising the ones that don't, in effect.
Correct. So we've been in business 32 years. Over 32 years, our average fall-through rate is exactly 25.1% over 32 years.
Right. Okay.
So 24.28 over the 7 year is not far off. Now, we build 25% into it. Obviously, if we have a marketplace like last year, we built a higher fall-through rate. We actually built in 30% last year, just to our whole budgeting strategy. So that's what we forecast. Okay. The difference with the lawyers, of course, is that they're going to retain a number of those instructions, whereas we won't as estate agents. So I would have thought more like 10 or 15% is probably what they should be building in.
Interesting point. Interesting point. They also deal with a lot more volumes, which is why their fees are a bit lower than yours. But they have increased quite markedly, haven't they, lawyers' fees?
Absolutely, rightly so, and it's something that I've been working with our law firm panels for over 10 years now as part of my role. And when I first started, I couldn't understand the mindset of we cannot put up fees. We've tried doing it; it doesn't work. You can't command the sort of fees you're quoting. And I said, you don't have to worry about that. We're the ones quoting them. We're the ones selling the service and selling your selling the conveyancing, so don't worry. And it proved very, very quickly it was about how they were being sold and the explanation. And we as estate agents are in quite a unique position, sat in people's homes, about to sell one of their biggest assets, and they want to hear who's who they should use, who's being recommended, who's useful, why they're useful, to use certain recommended firms. And the cost is not irrelevant, of course it's not, but they want to pay for a good service and to know that it's a good recommendation.
And just to be clear here, Kai, you use a set of local firms. You don't use firms up country, shall we say, or big what some would refer to as factory conveyancers. Yeah, that's not your model at all. You use firms in and about your locality in Devon and Cornwall, don't you?
Absolutely right. Yes, across Somerset, Devon, and Cornwall, all local firms we've worked with for a long period of time. We have the odd one that's fairly new that will engage and will join our panel. Absolutely, it's really, really important to our culture and our belief as a business to work with good recommended law firms.
Okay, sorry, we're a bit off track here, but we'll try and rattle through a few slides. Thanks very much for that. Okay, net sales, again, this is my predictor of the whole year, really. You can see the white line again above the pink line, so it's going really well. Net sales, just for an explanation, is the number of gross sales, sales agreed, less the number of fall-throughs. So this is what your pipeline is at any one moment in time. And you can see the big yellow line where there was no... sales completely came to a halt in February of 2020. When was it? 2020? Yeah, of course, with COVID. And then they suddenly picked back up again as soon as the lockdown was over. And there was almost a balancing act between the number that we lost during lockdown, and it all came back to into the game, with the yellow line above the average after that. But the important thing here is to see that the white line is above that pink line last year and significantly, nicely tracking the 2017 to 2019 average. It was above it in those first few months, and now it seems to be tracking almost exactly. Okay, you agree with that? Yeah.
I would, absolutely. As I said earlier, I believe that line will be more positive than the orange line, and certainly the pink line. Certainly the next 3 months, I just believe that we will see a bit of a bounce over the summer and early autumn period before we naturally will get a tail off at the end of the year for the winter months. But all of that makes sense, and fingers crossed that my optimism isn't misplaced.
I'm sure it will be. I think you're probably spot on. I agree with you. So we're just bringing up a couple of graphs here. I like to bring these in. Anthony Codling from Royal Bank of Canada came on the show a couple of months ago now, and showed us these stats, which I thought was interesting. This is the number of transactions over the longer term, and you can see that as of 2023, we were at a very low level, back to well below 1 million transactions, sort of 700,000 or 800,000 level, and that's starting to pick up again, but it's got a long way to go to get back above the million mark. Okay, and then the second one, mortgage approvals. Again, over a long period of time, we are at a very low ebb. Just look at where we were in the 90s and the thousands, and where we were getting 1.2 million transactions a year at those point in time. Now we've still got some way to go, haven't we?
Absolutely. I think that the expected interest rate, Bank of England rate, will drop at some point over the summer, whether it be once or twice, and all of that will trigger more people to go out and seek what their affordability currently is. We've already seen interest rates drop this week in anticipation of the Bank of England rate dropping. So the more positive news there are, the more that line will start to go upwards.
And that's right, of course. We've hit the peak of interest rates. So your prediction of it being a bit of a boom time in the late summer and early autumn, there's some basis of that. Interest rates coming down, newer government. There's nothing really to knock us off course at this moment in time.
No, the foundations are there. There is pent-up demand. People have been putting off what they've been looking to do for a long time. I don't think there's anything radical in any of the political parties' manifestos to suggest that the housing market's going to massively change or any great incentive over the short term. So I think people will literally just get back to where they were. We'll see interest rates probably drop a touch. And as a result, people just feel a bit more confident. They feel more inclined to go out and take action because things are settled and they feel comfortable with it. And I think that's why we'll see that little bounce upwards. Okay,
let's see. I don't often focus on this. It's the first time I've ever shown this graph on this show. I just thought we'd have a quick look at house prices. Chris was on about this last week on his show. And this, what we're looking at here, ladies and gentlemen, is the price per square foot of three elements. The red line is listings, the orange line is sold subject to contract, and the green line is exchanged. Obviously, in timeline, you get your listing first, your SST second, and your green and your exchanges somewhere down the line. So what's interesting here is from a price perspective, and this is the supply and demand, is that you've been listing houses at higher and higher prices throughout this year. And then you've been, just as is actually natural, you've been selling those houses, the orange line, at higher and higher prices. So that when we start to exchange on them in another month or so, that green line will start to improve as well. And I think Chris was saying this is a 95% accurate predictor of where house prices are going to be. So when you hear news that the Halifax and Nationwide are saying house prices are static or coming down, that's really old data now. That's like 6-9 months old. This is bang on the button early days stuff. Views, Kai?
Yeah, absolutely right. And it frustrates me that the media headlines are all so out of date. It really is. We're living in a data-driven world these days, and yet so many of the media report on stuff that's 3 to 6 months old, and that shapes people's actions or inaction. And so to see up-to-date data like this is A, refreshing, and B, should be publicised far wider than it is. And it would help everybody get a more accurate picture of exactly what is happening. And I absolutely agree that will start to go upwards again. And, you know, there's some really positive news there. I think that again, just where we're looking at July or June, May, June, July on there, you will just start to see that just carry on going. And I think that next year and looking forward, all the stability that we talked about earlier will just continue to see that rising in one steady upward trend.
Right, fantastic. Okay, so now I'm going to look in the conveyancing data and realise that, Kai, you're probably not as au fait with this, so I'll try and rattle through a bit and speed this along a little bit. What the stats tell us, and this has been the same for the last few months because we only get an update on the conveyancing data from 20 Conveyor once a quarter. So just to recap, there were 622,000 transactions completed in the year to ending 30th of December. That was slightly down on the year ending 30th of September 2023. That's because there was no Querting budget to take into account, of course, just all of 2023. This excludes new builds, and there's probably about 150,000 new builds to go on top of that. Average house price was 363,000, which has risen slightly, but again, is interestingly 23%, and we'll come back to this in a little while, of the properties sold were leasehold. And the most importantly, the average time to complete, that's from sold subject to contracts according to the property portals to completion according to the land registry, which is unique to 20 Conveyor data, was 113 days, and that had come down from 117 previously and as high as 123, 124 early in the year. So we have seen a marked improvement in times to complete. Kai, why do you think there's been an improvement in time to complete? Is it better lawyering, or is it or just a quieter market?
I think it's a quieter market, would be my guess. I also think that there has been an improvement. It's hard to comment because I'm obviously looking at Bradley's estate agent's data and not the wider picture, but we've certainly focused on more sellers being prepared to sell, engaging a lawyer, conveyancer at the outset. We've seen more uptake of that, and because of that, I do think that reduces the time. I think the next time you look at that, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes back up.
Because I've got a feeling that's going back up as well. Yeah,
I've seen it. We have seen a slowing again, but it's really strange. There was a point in March. I think it was the third week of March. Suddenly, exchanges accelerated in numbers, and partly to do with the sales from the end of last year, or could be the start of this year, starting to exchange. But it just seemed to suddenly reduce. And actually, we were monitoring the average days to exchange, and they were dropping and dropping almost week on week by just a few days. But that's quite significant.
Well, the next set of data will be out in a few days' time, So our next month's show will incorporate this. I wouldn't be surprised if next month it does come down a little bit further, because you're looking at that first 3 months of the year when it's quieter generally. But then in another 3 months' time, then we'll see the rise again. So we will see. Obviously, we have to wait for the data, just like the Bank of England has to wait for its inflation data. But as in when it comes out. Time to completion, this is the time, 20 days as an average across the country, how long it takes lawyers to get their registrations into the land registry after completion. So this is straight data from the land registry, looking at the date from completion, and 20 days is the average. Some firms are much better than that, and some are much worse, which is according to my colleague Richard Hinton at 20 Convey, is an indicator of how efficient a particular law firm is or isn't. Then just some look at the market share data for those who haven't seen this before. What we're seeing here, the 10 largest firms, excluding I exclude from those firms that are backed by private equity and are also the consultancy firms. So people like Simplify, we don't include in these figures because they're not competing with the general high street firms who we operate with, nor are the Taylor Roses and the Setfords of this world, because they're really lots and lots of little individual firms, all put together a bit like EXP in your estate agency world. But what we can see here is that the top 20 largest firms make up 10% of the market, and that's quite consolidated into those 10. And if we go on a step further, you can see that the top 100 firms, and remember there are over 4,000 conveyancing firms out there, but the top 100 firms make up 25% of the total market, and that's quite incredible, really, when you think we're talking less than 10% to be 400, so it's about 2.5% of firms make up 25% of all conveyancing. So it is becoming more and more consolidated into bigger firms. Do you get a feeling down in the Southwest, Kai, that the larger firms, and I don't mean the super big firms here, but are a bit more efficient than the smaller firms, or is it one-man bands are better, or what's your take on that?
I think it really does vary from law firm to law firm, and from our perspective, we do see a direct correlation in the resource they put into their conveyancing teams. We've got a couple of just one office, one branch, one location, I'm not sure what you call the lawyers' practices, companies that are very, very good, but the moment that they lose one or two of their staff, their fee earners or their case handlers, it literally just falls off a cliff, because they haven't got the resource of a wider, bigger firm. So I guess they're more susceptible, or vulnerable, I should say, in terms of resources. However, we have a number of large conveyances on our panel, and they seem to be far more consistent with their performance and their timescales and turnaround times, because they've got the additional resource they can pull in from other locations should they need to.
No, that absolutely makes common sense, doesn't it? I'm going to flick over this next slide that I'm showing here. I don't know if they can show this for us. This is showing how the timescales has come down, and it's come down across, but it's not the same for every firm. So you've got some firms have done really well at bringing their timescales down. Garvin's have brought it down 3 days. Look, Davison's in the West Midlands have brought it down 5 days. But then again, somebody like Convey Law have only brought it down one day. So it does vary very much from law firm to law firm. This isn't a case of completions or it's always determined by the slowest in the chain. Individual firms can make a significant difference by investing in technology and investing in staff and training and all the things you need to do. Post-completion, again, we were saying the average is 20 days, but actually some really efficient firms can do a lot better. I notice, I'll give them a shout out because I know they're one of your firms, Nolder's on here, who receive a lot of your work. 10 days is absolutely fantastic timescale, and therefore they're really organised and got themselves into a really good place. Well done to the Nolders. But all the firms on there, those are the fastest 10 in the top 250, and you all deserve a round of applause. Okay, at the end of all these shows, we tend to have a little focus on a particular town. I thought because we had Kai on the show, it would be only right to focus on the large county town in Devon, of Exeter. And so we're going to have a little focus on Exeter and what the conveyancing and what the estate agency market is like down there. So first of all, I thought we'd sort of drill down slowly. We'll look at the whole southwest. So what we're looking at here is the number of completions in 2023 for southwest. For the southwest, you can see there were 68,000 transactions in total in the southwest, which will probably include Bristol as well. So it includes all of your area, but just a bit more of Somerset as well, and Gloucester, I suppose. And you can see Setford's, who are one of these consultancy firms, so you don't see one big branch. There's lots of individuals there, but the biggest individual firm is Lions Bow, but only with a market share of the whole southwest of 1.4%. Okay, and you can see that there's a firm in blue there, and that is Lions Bow. And they've obviously been growing their I think that's Lions Bow anyway. I'm just trying to look at the colour schemes there. Lions Bow have been growing their market share quite considerably over that period, so well done to them. Then if we drill down a bit further and look at Devon rather than the southwest, which is just, again, Lions Bow come out of that because they're not in Devon, they're more to further east, Somerset Bay way. And the largest firm in Devon is WBW, well done to you. And you've got a really significant share. So if you're looking at Devon, two firms with WBW and Slee Blackwell, both with over 4% market share across the whole county. And that's pretty good. So this is the power of the 20 conveyor data. It really lets you know how you're doing, how well you're doing as a law firm, and how you compare to some of your competitors. And then finally, if we drill down a little bit further, we can go right down into Exeter itself. And after your advice, we've actually drilled this down to EX1 and EX5, Kai. So what do you make of that in terms of Exeter? You can see the largest firm there, Tozers, seem to have been losing a bit of market share. This goes back to 2021, but over the period, just a bit of comments there, Kai, on those?
Yeah, they're obviously all firms we're familiar with, and around the Exeter area. And we're really fortunate. We've got some fantastic law firms, very well set up, very good systems, processes and people in the Exeter area. The average purchase price is actually slightly lower than I thought it might be, just out of interest, but there we go.
$375.
So yeah, they're all really good firms. I'm slightly surprised at how dominant Tozer's market share is. Looking at
that is quite big, isn't it? I mean, 14%. If we looked at any town in the country, it's very rare to see a law firm get above a 10% market share. But it shows it can be done. And there are other towns, like Hull, we looked at the other week. There are a couple of firms in Hull with well over 10% market share. But it's all about how the law firm sets itself up to do marketing, wins the new business, and courts estate agents as well, I'm afraid. So just moving on then, we can actually look at some of the actual data in Exeter, and there you go. You can see how many completions they've done, what their average purchase price is, and their times to complete. Now, looking at Tozers, you're going to really like this, Tozers. If you're watching today, or if anybody knows anybody at Tozers, your time to complete is 108 days. Is comparing very favourably to a lot of other firms in that area. The average is 113. There's only another one firm quicker, I would say, or two firms quicker, and that is Stamp James, but they're a fairly small firm with 65 completions. And My Home Move seem to have done well down there as well, unusually for My Home Move. But look at the times to move, and this is interesting because it also affects where you're getting the work from. So you're seeing some significant differences in time to move, and that is from when the house goes on the market to completion. So Tozer's 207, so obviously working with some slower agents there, and somebody who's probably not working with agents at all, 169, Stamp James, that's relatively quick. That is quite good, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. I know the people, the partners of Stamp James well, actually, so they'll be very pleased to see that. That it really does depend on lots of factors that whether you're getting a client set up and engaged right at the outset, your processes to get a client onboarded, all those things will have an impact, direct impact on those timescales.
Very good. And just moving on a bit further, I wanted to focus here. This was a really interesting one. That is for all properties. If we just focus on leasehold, then obviously there'll be quite a lot of leasehold stuff in Exeter. In fact, there's 20%. If we go back there, you can see 19.22% of all properties in Exeter were leasehold. If we just look at those, look at the timescale differences. So 126 days is the average time to complete for leasehold properties in Exeter, whereas if we look at all properties, it's 113 days. Okay, so significantly longer, and the time to move, and this is really important, is 189 days for all properties. But if you're only looking at leasehold, it's 60 days longer. 241 days. That means that property is on the market for 2 months longer. What's your take on that, Kai?
I'm not surprised in the slightest. I'm actually almost surprised it's not even longer. Oh, the gap between all properties versus leasehold.
Yeah, if I'd have pulled out the freeholds, of course, the freehold only would probably be it'll be probably about 108 or something, and then we're looking at nearly a 30-day gap or something.
Absolutely, there is so much more information and detail, obviously, that lawyers have to go into and to look at, and more importantly, to obtain from third parties with the leasehold. And that's the reliance, isn't it? That's the frustration, is the reliance on these third parties. Some are speedier than others, so I understand. But it is frustrating. But sellers are often unaware of a lot of the information of their leasehold property, whether it be investment or owner occupied. So you're then reliant upon management companies and other information to form an accurate picture, and that's largely why. But we've seen certainly a drop-off in interest over the last probably 10 years, but certainly the last 5 years in leasehold property. That if you look at property prices having increased certainly post-COVID, but you look at the average property price increase on a leasehold premises, very, very small compared to a freehold. So
right, interesting. Yeah, you don't see that stat bandied around very much, do you, at all? Leasehold property is not rising in value. It's just become more and more problematical, especially with the Building Safety Act stuff as well. I mean, has really driven problems through it, hasn't it?
Very much so.
So I thought we'd just have a quick look. Just to show the power of the 20-year data, because Tozers were top of the list here. We've done a snapshot of the actual Tozers data, which this is what the sort of power that this platform can give. You can see that Tozers are the 208th ranked firm in the country in terms of volume. Their total time to complete is 109. That's across both leasehold and freehold and anywhere in the country, not just in the southwest. You can see the concentration of all their work in the southwest around Exeter. Their average completion price is £406,000, and they completed 549 purchase transactions, excluding new builds, in 2023. So this data is really, really useful for law firms, and this is a brilliant example. And well done to Tozers for really pushing the boat and making a go of it down in the southwest. Final one. This is one for you to have to comment on, Kai. We thought the data also can be supplied, can give you estate agency data. So here we've got a list of estate agents in the southwest, and a lot of their data. This again is the full year, right up to date, up to the 24th of June, so the last 12 months, and who have been the biggest. And there you are, sat in 4th place. Come on, Kai, pull your finger out.
Yeah, that's so we've got 2 branches in Exeter and 2 different districts. Technically we've got 3 because we've got one in Southern here as well, but so we try and concentrate on different marketplaces within the Exeter marketplace, whereas some will just deal with the whole of the Exeter marketplace, which is fine. But there's some really good data, but what's really interesting for me is if you look along the summary line at the bottom there, is the percentage of properties going to SSTC at only 55%, which is extremely low. Now, our figure there at 67% is not the lowest, clearly, but I'm disappointed with 67%. Particularly in Exeter, I would expect that to be far, far higher.
What do you think? Why do you think that is then?
Budget somewhere around 85%, maybe 90%. So to only have that's somewhat surprising.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think a lot of properties are coming on? Do you think it's leasehold stuff in Exeter Centre because it's a lot of student flats and things, or?
We do have more leasehold in Exeter and in Plymouth, our 2 cities. that's natural in any larger town or city. I actually don't think it's that. I think it's an adjustment. Exeter is quite an economic microclimate, very heavily based around public sector workers. It has a lot of more influence from London than any of the other towns or cities in our region, whether it be because there's an airport that flies to London, I don't know. But we tend to have a little microclimate in Exeter. And I think what's happened there is a lot of misunderstanding on pricing of property. I think that's the large error, but also a lack of confidence, perhaps, in Exeter itself, possibly. But I would largely put that down to pricing.
Yeah. And as you can say, SSTC 67% for yourselves, and other firms nowhere near that. So if you were putting your house up for sale, you would definitely be looking at yourselves, or the Fraser Wheeler at 78%. That's an unbelievably high figure. But perhaps less so some of the other firms in town who are down in the 50s and even 40s, you can see there. So interesting data. And this is the power of having something like 20 TA, 20 Convey. And is what I would say to all the law firms out there. Unless you understand your marketplace, unless you understand what's happening with your own competitors and with the estate agents who you work with, it's very difficult to run your business. And therefore, what we're offering is the ability to come and have a look at these sorts of things. So come back onto our show on a regular basis. And if you want to engage more and learn a bit more about what we do and what 20A do, just give us a call. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've had 50 minutes there, Kai. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed that and you've been brilliant. I hope you'll come back and join us maybe next year.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
That's great. So best of luck to England in their last 16 game, and try not to put us all to sleep. More importantly, best of luck to England in the T20 cricket tomorrow night. So good luck to everyone. I hope you have a lovely weekend, and we'll see you all next month.